great combination of attendees there, ranging from politicians. I spoke to at least one Prime Minister. We had academics, we had business people, we had even some NGOs. So it was a very good mixture discussing the role of the private sector in the development for Africa.
It's really interesting that you mentioned the private sector, because there's a report that's just come out from the Business Advisory Group that advises the Africa Progress Panel that's in fact said just that the private sector is key to maximizing the growth opportunities and potential in Africa. You know, we talked about, I said in my introduction, there's practical measures. Were they actually discussed, those practical measures? They
certainly were. Let me give you a couple of examples. First of all, on innovative financing, the need to get capital into Africa. And we had a long session on how we can attract more capital into Africa. A number of issues came out from that. The environment has got to be conducive to attracting capital. For example, for business, infrastructure is absolutely key. Good infrastructure, roads that work, railways that work, ports that work, aircraft and so forth. And there's a lot to be done still in infrastructure in Africa.
I wanted to ask you, obviously this is time to kind of coincide before the G8 meetings that are taking place in Canada, and there's been a lot of talk about how we need to change the conversation when people gather to talk about Africa. Going into this G8, where does Africa fit into the global picture in this upcoming meeting?
Well, if you think about the growth potential of Africa, it's extraordinary. The US last year was in recession, Europe was in recession, and Africa was still growing despite the difficulties at 2% approximately, and projecting to grow in 2010 by 4%. That shows a lot of potential for business. But the environment for business is not as good as it should be, and a lot of the discussion was about making it better and easier for businesses to invest in Africa.
Now, I know that infrastructure is a big thing for you, and you spoke about it in your innovative financing session titled Looking Beyond the Global Financial Crisis. What is beyond the global financial crisis? What lays beyond?
What lies beyond is great opportunity. I'm convinced that Africa now, with approximately 1 billion consumers, is the next frontier for growth. We've seen tremendous growth going on in China and India and other emerging markets. Africa has growth, but not at the rate that we've seen in other markets. But I believe that Africa can now grow and move forward in a very dramatic way. But as I said, there are issues that need to be cracked, such as the business environment and infrastructure, as I've already mentioned.
Where does CDC focus its business at the moment, and what are your priorities? What are your top priorities right now for this year?
We have a mix of investments across various sectors, financial sector, infrastructure, manufacturing, agribusiness and so forth. We think that a balanced approach is right. No one economy should depend on one sector. We've seen the disadvantages of that in places like South Africa, which did have a hiccup because of the dependence on mineral resources. So we want to see a broad-based approach, and that's what we do with our investment strategy.
We've had some forecasts from global organizations about growth for this year, globally growth for Africa. It looks like Africa, or it looks like the developing world is going to be outpacing the Western world.
Indeed.
You know, how does that kind of fit into the picture of practical measures to make the most of this kind of growth?
Well, one of the strengths of Africa is agriculture. Africa has huge resources. One of the problems has been that it is not developed in terms of yields and efficiencies in the way that's happened elsewhere. So one immediate answer to your question would be to put significant effort in getting yields up, getting more efficiency, crop yields, and getting more efficiency out of the tremendous potential that Africa has in agribusiness.
And finally, Richard, let me just ask you if there is a message coming out of this meeting. I mean, I imagine the purpose of it was to formulate some kind of unified voice and take that message to the G8. What does the African business community want the G8 to know?
Well, the conference is going to come out with its recommendations later today, but my take on this would be the business community is very excited about Africa, but governments have got to play their role. Doing business in Africa is not straightforward. Governments need to make that easier for business, less bureaucracy, more efficiency, decisions being taken on things such as infrastructure and other areas as well. And governments have got to take a lead in this.